We'll start off with the European Political Community meeting that took place last week. Let's get them on screen because they are a delightful bunch, aren't they?
Yes, Mike.
Yes, because they stand firm with Ukraine, as you can see. Now, we reported that Liz Truss was going to this meeting earlier. I think it was Monday last week. So this was the first meeting of the European Political Community. It took place in Prague on Thursday. The government issued a couple of press releases and some photographs. So here she is with Macron, whose idea this whole thing was, apparently. It's all about fostering political dialogue and cooperation to address the issues of common interest. And it's about strengthening security, stability, and prosperity in the European continent. And point we made was that the security bit means defense. So here she is signing something, and we're not entirely sure what she was signing because they didn't tell us. And here is the press release. If anybody wants to go and find it, Prime Minister welcomes powerful show of solidarity at European leaders meeting, and they're talking about energy and so on, but they're not talking about security or defense. And then on Friday evening, the Express published this. Liz Truss warned she could be falling into EU army trap with new military agreement. So let's have a look and see what, a couple of people were quoted in it. First of all, we've got Gerald Howarth here, the former defence minister, saying this is very serious and we must be very careful. The issue around PESCO, this is permanent structured cooperation, is that the structures are permanent. We must not sign up to anything which undermines our sovereignty and where we do not have a veto. And then he fell into type, which of course is the narrative from the government from the beginning on this issue of UK involvement in European defence. Second, we must not do anything that undermines NATO. If we haven't learned anything over the last few months, if we have learned anything over the last few months, is that we need NATO for the defence of Western values and Europe against our enemies, which at the moment is clearly Russia. Now, Gerald Howarth, they're clearly positioning himself, Russia is the enemy. Well, actually, if we go back a few years, Alex reported this incident, which took place because he was hosting a meeting of the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine in 2017. And he said at that meeting that the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine exists to ensure that the the UK Parliament is constantly aware of the challenges that are faced by Ukraine. And a particular journalist stood up and commented on this, Graham Phillips. Will you be commenting on how Ukraine is shelling and killing civilians in Donbass? Because I think that should be on the agenda. And as you can see from the video, the audience turned around and said, "Liar, shut up, get him out." And he was indeed manhandled out by this security team.
What a reflection on UK, Mike, that somebody stands up and warns that people are being attacked, and whoever the audience was in that environment, they didn't want to hear that.
No, and of course Graham Phillips now has been sanctioned by the UK government. So anyway, that's Howarth and his background. But another person quoted by the Express in their article was Marc Francois, the chair of the ERG, the European Research Group. This is a Brexit group within the Tory party and a former member of the Defence Select Committee. And he said, as we're outside the EU, we can opt into individual PESCO projects if they have merit, and looking at how we could speed up reinforcing the Baltic states from the UK across internal EU borders may well have military advantages. So he's now fully on board with this idea, it seems. Even though he's supposed to be a Brexiteer, however, it is NATO that remains the bedrock of our security, especially in deterring further Russian adventurism, and we should never forget that. So again, parroting the UK government narrative over the last lot of years on this issue of defence union. So anyway, just getting back to the original European Political Community event, let's just see what Joseph Borrell, the effectively EU foreign minister, said about it.
Its brutal aggression against Ukraine, Europe has entered in a new phase of our history. And today 44 European leaders gather here together in order to study how to build a new security structure in Europe. It has to be done without Russia, not because we don't want Russia to be part of Europe, but because Russia's Putin has taken out of the European community. The European community is formed by these 44 states. Some of them are members of the European Union, and others they are not. Some they don't want to, others they were members and they left, and others are still not members, but they will become members. And altogether has to define the new lines for the Europeans. Europe has to face the crisis created by the war in Ukraine, has to build a new security order to face the food and energy crisis. And this forum, this community, this political community, is the best way for the Europeans, all Europeans, inside the Union and outside the Union, to face it.
Well, my take on that, Mike, is that they're in absolute chaos because they simply do not know what to do. The sanctions have not worked. These have been the big things that they were going to bring Russia under control by a whole variety of sanctions. The Russians can just continue to do what they were doing, and now it's clear that the only people that the sanctions have hurt are people in Europe and UK and the US. But for Europe, they do not know what to do at the moment.
Well, but what they have done is to create this new group. The UK, which has always said it would not take part in European Defence Union projects, that NATO was the bedrock of everything, has now decided that it wants to be part of PESCO, which is one of the key pillars of European Defence Union. Well, the key point here is there has been zero commentary. There are no press releases, nothing in the British press, nothing in the European press about it. And just to clarify, other than that Express article, and which really didn't give very much in the way of detail, but to clarify that Liz Truss appears to have asked for membership of PESCO. There was a vote held, and that vote has approved the UK's membership of PESCO. So anyway, just to give a little bit of background to this, we'll come on to a video with Ursula von der Leyen in a second. The point here is that the European Union always considered Africa, in particular North Africa, to be its southern neighbourhood and a really key part of its area of influence. But what we've seen in the recent months, and really again getting very little coverage in the press, has been more and more active warfare in the Sahel in particular. So here's an example. Tweet here from a couple of days ago. A coup has taken place in Burkina Faso, and the Wagner Group, brackets mercenaries who act covertly for Moscow, has declared support for the new leader, and so on. That Burkina Faso has had multiple coups in recent years as colonial influence clashes with growing anti-Western bloc. Well, one person who's been sort of quoted on this is Alexander Ivanov, because he's been asked, what is the Wagner Group's influence in Africa? And he said, well, he doesn't speak for them, so he can't speak for them. But he does speak for the Officers Union for International Security, which, according to this article, is famous for its example of effective cooperation between Russia and African nations. And this particular report talking about the Central African Republic, where this organization is represented by Russian instructors who managed in a short time to instruct the soldiers of the Central African Armed Forces, which allowed the Central African government to create a powerful army ready to defend national interests and ensure the protection of civilians against armed groups widespread in the country. And this is the problem. Islamic insurgency has been, in particular, a problem for many of these countries. Let's have a look at this from African Hub. Many African leaders taking a very anti-Western position at the moment. So this is the president of Uganda talking to CNN about LGBTQ and saying, we don't want this in our country, but it's coming anyway through Western NGOs, and really saying that it's not acceptable. Then we have this from France 24. Niger becomes France's partner of last resort after Mali withdrawal, because the French, who are the sort of main boots on the ground in the region, have had to move out from Mali because they're not wanted there anymore. But then we've also got the Chinese influence as well. So Russia and China, massive investment, in this case, this article highlighting Djibouti, where China has what is described as a military base, but also Japan has a military base there as well. So there's potential conflict there too. So what has this got to do with European Defence Union? Well, we have a little bit of video here from, I think it was February 2019. This is Ursula von der Leyen and Tony Blair speaking separately, but apparently from the same hymn sheet. Now, many of you will have seen this before, many of you won't have, but this maybe gives us a clue as to what's going on here.
First of all, our collective defense, we are ironclad committed to NATO. NATO of 29, that is collective defense Article 5. But there are problems and issues where I do not see NATO, but Europe has to be able to act.
That though this transatlantic alliance with America is extremely important and we need to maintain it, the best partnership is a partnership where we have our own capabilities that are also strong.
I was talking about Africa. This is not a typical place for NATO. We are very committed to NATO in other places, but Africa is a place where we need to be able to act as Europeans.
For example, one of the things that my institute does is work in Africa, and at the moment we're particularly focused on the Sahel group of countries. That's that band of countries across the north part of sub-Saharan Africa, where you've got exploding populations, dire poverty, radicalization and extremism. We may well face the next wave of migration and extremism from those countries. It makes perfect sense for Europe to have the military capability to help those countries with their security.
And for that, we created the European Defence Union,
right,
to have a comprehensive approach with diplomacy, economic development, and the military means.
Right, so what we have here is Russia being used as the driver to push forward with this European Defence Union policy. Britain now on board despite Brexit, but in the meantime, massively underreported is the continuing chaos in Africa, where of course the Europeans themselves see their military capability as having most influence. And what's interesting here, Brian, is that of course these countries that are experiencing insurgencies and chaos and so on the receiving end of huge quantities of Foreign Office Conflict Security and Stability Fund money, and also Tony Blair, who's supposed to be in there to counter insurgency. It seems that everywhere he goes, there ends up being more insurgency. Yeah. So I'm trying to give a picture of that. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I just want to add that perhaps our viewers and listeners would like to go and have a look at the Tony Blair's Africa Governance Initiative, and that gives you a real overview of where Tony Blair is. Of course, it's all about helping the poorer nations. Tony Blair is going to get in there. He's going to help these people. But as you've just said, Mike, there's an uncanny pattern that wherever the British or the Europeans are getting involved in Africa, strife and trouble follows.
And again, it's Russia and China